On the 4th of December, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi made a big announcement. He said that the Indian Navy epaulets will now bear the imprint of Chhatrapati Shivaji. This is what an epaulet is. It is worn by soldiers on the shoulder or the sleeve cuffs. This is what Indian Navy epaulets looked like until now. They featured the Nelson's ring. The Indian Navy inherited it from the colonial navy in 1932. That was the year the Royal Indian Navy, or RIN, was born. And in the years that followed, the British were driven out of India. The Royal Indian Navy became the Indian Navy. But the Nelson's ring remained. It became an emblem of colonialism, firmly clutching India. It is 2023. India has started dumping the colonial legacy. Hello and welcome to Gravitas Plus. I am Molly Gambhir. India is in the middle of a military decolonization. In September 2022, India changed the Navy's ensign or flag. The colonial cross of St. George was replaced by Shivaji's octagonal stamp. Let me tell you a quick story. Shivaji is called the father of the Indian Navy. Soon after coming to power in the mid-1600s, Shivaji realized the importance of maritime security. He realized that ports need to be safeguarded, as do the merchant ships. In 1655, he tested the preparedness of this navy by attacking Basuru near Kundapura in present-day Karnataka. Shivaji's navy returned with a huge booty. At its peak, Shivaji's fleet had 400 ships. They were of different sizes and kind. While the Cholas first displayed their prowess in the water, it was Shivaji who modernized the navy. He ruled the seas. India is celebrating Shivaji's legacy, also shaking off the colonial shackles, like the practice of carrying batons or these wooden or metal sticks. For the longest time, these sticks symbolized power. In July, the Navy said, with the passage of time, carrying of batons by naval personnel has become a norm. The symbolism of authority or power pot heated through the holding of a baton is a colonial legacy that is out of place in a transformed navy of Amrit Kal. Now, only a ceremonial baton is placed in the office of the head of every unit. The ceremonial handing over of the baton happens within the office premises. Here's another military tradition that is being cleaned of colonial elements: the beating retreat ceremony. It is held every year on the 29th of January in the heart of India's capital city, New Delhi. Mass bands of three wings of the Indian Armed Forces, the Army, the Navy and the Air Force march to popular anthems. Beating the retreat is actually a centuries-old tradition. Its origin goes back to 17th century England. King James II was in power then. He had ordered his troops to beat drums, lower flags, and put together a parade to mark the end of the day of fighting. How did this tradition become a part of India's annual Republic Day celebrations? Well, it started in the 1950s, when Queen Elizabeth II was visiting independent India for the first time. Beating the retreat was put together to mark the Queen's arrival. The band marched to English and Irish tunes, the likes of Colonel Bogie March, Sons of the Brave. Today, the ceremony caps off the Republic Day celebrations. The tunes have evolved over the years. In 2015, Indian classical instruments like the sitar, tabla and santoor made their debut. And by 2018, 25 of the 26 tunes were composed by Indians. The only colonial composition was Abide With Me. The hymn was written by Henry Francis Lyte in 1847 and was one of Mahatma Gandhi's favorite hymns. In 2022, Abide With Me was dropped. It was replaced by Ae Mere Watan Ke Logon. The song was composed by C. Ramchandra and it was first sung on Republic Day 1963 by none other than India's Nightingale, late Lata Mangeshkar. Ae Mere Watan Ke Logo honors Indian soldiers who died in the 1962 war with China. The change made global headlines. But back home in India, people asked, what was wrong in freeing our military bands of the misery of marching to British tunes? During this year's Beating the Retreat, bands played songs like Swadeshi, Young India, Ekla Cholo Re, tunes that Indian masses actually connect with. Today, India is also dismantling cantonments. These military townships are the legacy of British rule. India's first cantonments came up in the 17th century. This was during the rule of the British East India Company. The first ones were built in Barakpur in Bengal, Danapur in Bihar, and St. Thomas Mount in Madras. The primary objective was military housing. The colonial armed forces would be quartered in the cants, insulating them from people they ruled. And as the years passed by, bazaars came up within these areas. Civilians began working and residing within their boundaries. On paper, it was an epitome of coexistence and peace. In reality, there would be well-defined areas for both armed personnel and civilians. Civilians would not have access to areas demarcated for the military only. In 1947, independent India had 57 cantonments. 6 more were notified later. While the Air Force and the Navy had bases, the Army had cantonments. The Ajmer Cant was the last one to be built in the year 1962. In total, these cantonments covered over 1.6 lakh acres of land and housed over 50 lakh military and civilian population. They were governed by the Central Cantonments Act, and the local municipal bodies had no jurisdiction. The military areas were managed by the military authorities. The civilian parts were governed by the Cantonment Board. This board, which would have a mix of military officials and elected members, and would rely on grants. The infrastructure in the civilian areas soon began crumbling. They weren't as maintained as the military areas. Reports say there were also tussles between the military and the civilian population. The colonial cantonments are now being disbanded. The plan is to carve out the military areas, convert them into exclusive military stations, and give their exclusive control to the army. The civilian areas, on the other hand, would be merged with the local municipalities. These changes come at a time when India is actively trying to shake off the colonial hangover, both in the mainland and in the islands far away. Colonial names have been dumped. Ross Island has been renamed Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose Dweep. Neil Island has become Shahid Dweep, and Havelock, Swaraj Dweep. In the national capital, Racecourse Road has become Lok Kalyan Marg, changing the Prime Minister's residential address from 7 Racecourse Road to 7 Lok Kalyan Marg. Over 1,500 archaic laws have also been repealed, and the budget briefcase has been replaced with Bahi Khata. Do any of these moves amount to much, you may ask? Does changing names and flags mean much? It does. Your name is your identity. What you wear is your identity as well. During India's freedom movement, Mahatma Gandhi asked India to wear indigenous khadi. Sure, India still has a long way to go before it completely embraces its roots and its culture, but what we have here is a good start. A start towards restating the idea of India, an India that is ahead of its time and proud of its past, an India that is Bharat.